Good morning, everybody. Welcome to, excuse me, that's a bad start. Welcome to this morning's webinar on printing directly in Capture One. So we're going to look at two different methods today. So either printing directly from Capture One, which you can do, and why you should do that, and also if you want to use a printing service, i.e. produce outputs that are sized and correctly color managed to go to an external service. If this is your first webinar and you don't know who you're listening to, my name is David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. We have approximately 60 minutes to run with each other today. We might not need all of that. It's actually relatively simple to print and process, but let's see how it goes. You're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. The way you do that, if you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a section called questions. Put a question in there, that will come straight through to me. Equally, if you're on your iOS device or Android device, you'll see a question mark icon on the screen. Tap that, and again, you can send a question straight through to me. So that's what we're going to do today. I am recording the session 2. So if you can't remember everything, don't feel you need to write everything down. You can simply review it again at a later date with all the other previous webinars as well. They are stored on a YouTube playlist. I'll give you details of that playlist at the end of the webinar as well. So that's what we're going to be doing. So give me a second. I will switch over to Capture One itself. Which you should see in a matter of seconds. And let's get the questions panel up as well so I can see what we're doing. So one other thing that we need to do, we've already set up our printer. I'll explain what I'm printing to and so on in a minute, but let's just get the mouse locator running so you can see the mouse on screen, which helps that. So as I said, what we're going to do today, we're going to do two different things. We're going to prepare an image for sending to an external service for printing, and we're going to print directly from Capture One as well. First of all, let's do the first option. Let's process out two images for using with an external service. Excuse me. Now, what I'm going to use is a company called Whitewall, purely because we have a deal going with them. We can offer you a discount on their printing services, which is always nice. But the rules that you see applied here can work for any sort of printing service. So just to give you an idea of what Whitewall is, I'll just bring up their page. If you haven't heard of Whitewall, it's a relatively large company based out of Germany, but with printing stations in various other places. So you can go to Whitewall and order your prints in various different sizes, shapes, and materials, and so on. What I would suggest you do with whatever printing services that you're going to use, Whitewall's a good example of this, is that you see if you can download ICC profiles. Here is the ICC profile download for Whitewall. So you can actually use those profiles within Capture One. So if we click on this link, for example, you can see they list, I pretty much think, all of their different papers and materials that you can print on, and also the various ICC profiles that you have on the right-hand side. Now, to make sure that Capture One can see those ICC profiles, you just have to make sure they're in the right place on your system. For Mac, it's kind of relatively easy if we just go to the Finder. So once you've downloaded your ICC profiles from your service provider, if you just find the hard drive, Macintosh HD, go to Library, ColorSync, profiles, then you can just drop the profiles in here. You can see some of them like Hannah Mueller, Photo Rag, bright, that's this one down here, and so on. So you just need to drop those into the profiles folder, and then Capture One will see them. That's if you're on a Mac. On a PC, it's a slightly different location, slightly different process. I can't remember, I'm sorry, off the top of my head where that is, but a quick Google search should bring that up for you. But that's pretty important. So if you are using a service provider, as I said, see if you can get their ICC profiles. I mean, it's not a requirement. If you look at what Whitewall suggest, they say send your images JPEG TIFF 300 DPI 8-bit with an embedded sRGB color profile. That's fine, but if you can actually use the proper ICC profile, then we can actually soft proof within Capture One, and you'll get some idea of what the results are going to look at. Thomas is asking that his colors aren't quite correct when he's printing via Capture One, but that's actually a good question, Thomas, because there's a few things you need to make sure are in place to make sure you get good colors, and that's the purpose of today as well. So what if we wanted to create an output to send to a service like Whitewall? As I said, I'm using Whitewall because we can offer you a discount. I'll give you the discount code a bit later on, and then produce a print that is ready. Well, I've made a bunch of process recipes, as you can see down here on the right hand side, and these process recipes are pre-prepared with the right ICC profile for the right material. I'll actually give you a download of all the process recipes as well. You may have to modify them slightly, but they should work for you whether you're on Mac or PC, so you can use them both. So this is by far the best way to sort of get an image ready for output, is to create a process recipe. As I said, these are ones I've pre-created, but we just go through about how to make one. So let's recreate one. Let's say pick one of the Hahnemuhle papers, for example. So to make a new process recipe, let's say plus down here. Let's call this Whitewall, as I know the service. I can never spell Hahnemuhle, H-A-N-E-M-U-H-L-E. And we call this, which one was I going to do again? William Turner. That's an easy profile to spot. William Turner, like so. So I've named a process recipe. Now we have to create the process recipe here. Now Whitewall and your other service provider will tell you what format they prefer. Probably for best quality TIFF 8-bit, of course, or you could go JPEG, but if they take a TIFF, why not give them the best quality you can throw at them? Now this is the important part, your output ICC profile. So as I said, if you place your ICC profiles in the correct system, then let's go for looking down here, and Whitewall, Hahnemuhle, William Turner. So it just pops up in the list like so. So you can see I've got some profiles here for the Epson 2880, which is attached, for example, but let's just pick the William Turner profile like so. You can actually see the image change then because we're soft proofing based on the ICC profile here. So this will give you a sort of idea. I mean, it is subjective, of course, an idea of how that image is going to pop out on the paper. So if you think, well, it's looking a little bit flat, maybe I need to add a bit more contrast and so on, then you can do so. Paul says, why 8-bit? Well, there's probably not much point sending a 16-bit file. First of all, Whitewall, this particular service provider, says 8-bit. So if you try and send them a 16-bit, they're probably just going to drop it down to 8-bit anyway. To be honest, there's probably very, very, very little advantage from printing 8 to 16-bit, to be honest. I will confess that I'm no printing expert. I'm no color management expert. I do know the basics, but we could probably get into all kinds of discussions about what's better and what isn't, and you'll find totally polar opinions on the internet, as you always do. But what I can do is try and give you the best processes to follow, and then you can move on from there. Dominic, you've just asked the same question as Paul. So as I said, the whole purpose of having a 16-bit TIFF file is that gives you more data to then work with if you're going on to do retouching in Photoshop. But if you're just sending it to printer, very little, if no benefit at all in printing in 16-bit. If you don't believe me, then do a test. I think with all of this, if you think something is potentially better than another, send an 8-bit file to a printer and send a 16-bit, put them next to each other and see if you can tell the difference. It'll only cost you a sheet of paper. That's probably the best way to determine it. So we've got our correct ICC profile. Resolution-wise, again, you could check your service provider. Uploaded file should ideally be 300 dpi. So there we go. So we can have our resolution set to 300 dpi. Now, scale is the important bit. If it's fixed, then it's going to push out, or Capture One will export the largest possible file it can. Now, if you're printing to, depending on the service, like 30 by 20, 20 by 40, A4, A3, A2, or whatever, it might make sense to actually scale the image here and now in Capture One so you know exactly what you're going to get. If we look at the crop on this particular image, let's just turn the crop on, choose it like so, then we can see this is the crop. So it's had a bit of rotation. So let's say you'd cropped it, oh, I quite like my image cropped like this, for example. That's how I want to print it. But do we know if our dimensions are 30 by 20 centimeters, or at least in the correct proportions? You don't have any idea. So of course, when you send it to a printing service, maybe they're going to lose a bit of the top and bottom, maybe cut the sides. You don't know. So it's probably best to send the image size to the output that you want to have. So let's actually consider that we want a 30 by 20 centimeter print, just as an example. So under scale, we're going to change this to dimensions over here. So you've got various different options like setting the long edge or the short edge or the width and the height, but let's go to actual dimensions so we can lock it to certain dimensions. We have different, what's the word I'm looking for? Units here. Obviously it makes sense for us to choose centimeters. So let's go by 30 by 20 centimeters like so. Now the crucial bit here is in the crop tool. If we turn our crop tool on again, let's press C, whoops, not C on the keyboard because I'm over here. Let's choose our crop tool up here. Now you can see right now that we've got 30 centimeters across, like so, and so on. But if you want to spend lots of time trying to lock it exactly to 30 by 20, that gets very difficult. And the reason why this number is in red is because we're not matching our recipe here. Now, rather than fiddling around trying to sort of hit the magic numbers, the easiest thing you can do in the crop tool is just set this to output. And now the crop is going to be constrained to what we set in our output dimensions. So let's say output like so. And now you see, as soon as I grab the top, tool here, then it snaps to 30 by 20. So however I resize the image, we're going to be snapped to 30 by 20. So now you can be sure that, all right, I want to have a crop like this, and I know that my dimensions are in 30 by 20, and my printing service provider isn't going to trim the top, trim the sides, or etc. So that's a really good way of knowing exactly what you're going to get when you send it to print. Ernst says, what about sharpening in Capture One? Good point. We're going to come to that actually. Now, of course, if you're sending to a print service provider, again, there's always going to be a bit of trial and error, personal preference, depending on print size, depending on viewing distance, all kinds of things. I mean, there's no magic number when we have to say you must set the print settings to this. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist. I mean, if we look at this image at 100%, see, it has the benefit of being pretty sharp. Currently, it's just sort of has some very little sort of basic sharpening on the image. But as we're going to print, we could argue that we could probably bump up that sharpening a bit more. Again, the values here, there is no magic number that everything will necessarily give you the best print. Again, it could be some possibility of trial and error. Now, with a print, you can probably afford to push the sharpening a little bit higher than you normally would. So if you feel that you could get away with a bit more sharpening, I'd probably still keep the radius relatively low, but we could probably afford to bump up the sharpening a bit more just so it's a bit crisper on the paper itself. One thing that you can try to experiment with is drop the sharpening down to, sorry, not the sharpening, drop the zoom level down to 50%. And then have an experiment. We were here before, we were at 180. and then have an experiment where you think what you can look at. So sometimes it's a good idea to judge sharpening at 50% when you're going to print, but again, there is no magic number. Christian says, am I able to lay out the white frame around the print which is offered by Whitewall? Good question, Christian. No, probably not. I mean, if you did want to have a white frame on your image, then I guess you could do it from a TIFF file. Like if you exported the full-size image out to Photoshop and then added your frame, and then you could bring it back into Capture One. But I can't suggest a way where you could simulate that in Capture One. So sorry about that. Different prints, different sharpening, so different variants. Could we rename the variant to the type of print? Yeah, of course you could. That's a really good idea, actually. That was Hans suggesting that. So you could easily do that. So if you wanted to have a new variant, we could just say new variant, and then you could have different variants for different outputs. Now you can't rename the variants, but what you could do as an example in the metadata, you've got plenty of metadata fields. So in the description here in IPTC content, you could always add the kind of paper and print type that you're using. So that's a really good idea, Hans. Oh, good tip from Alan. To install the print profiles in Windows, right-click on the profile and follow your nose. So that's a good idea. Hilton says, why not use the overlay for the white border? You could do, I guess, but I think what Christian wanted to do was physically add like a white border for printing on the image. Correct me if I'm wrong, Christian, but maybe you could somehow use overlay to do that. Okay, so yes, just to finish up on sharpening, as I said, there is no magic number, but try to judge. You could try to judge at 50% to see where you could fall off. Again, there could be a little bit of trial and error. So, and again, based on paper size, viewing distance, paper stock, all kinds of different things. Maybe worth sending Whitewall support a message or your service provider if they have any recommendations. Okay, so we're happy with our dimensions. Remember, in our process recipe, we put our dimensions in here, 30 by 20. By the way, it doesn't matter if you put 20 by 30 or 30 by 20. What you'll find is when you crop, if I force the crop into a portrait, you see it snaps to 20 by 30. So there's no real sort of difference that you have to do really for adding 20 by 30, 30 by 20, and so on. So we're sized 30 by 20. We've got the correct ICC profile. Now we're ready to output that, for example. Now I'm working in a session, Capture One session for file management. Same kind of rule applies for catalogs, really. The only difference with the catalog is that you have to specify your output location first. In the Capture One session, it goes directly to the output folder, which is currently empty in this session. Now, to find the image easily when we output, we can do a really simple thing. We can ask Capture One to automatically make a subfolder with that image in, and the subfolder can be based on all kinds of criteria, but I'm actually going to say the recipe name like so. So I know that when this image is output, it's going to be in a folder called Whitewall Hahnemuhle William Turner, like so. So let's say process, blah, 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 and then that will process out, which won't take very long. And then if I click on this small arrow here, it takes me to the output folder. We can see William Turner, Whitewall, and then there's our image like so. Resized nicely to 30 by 20 and ready for upload. Francis says, is there a way to sharpen post rescaling? This is better than trial and error. Yes, I agree, Francis. But no, there isn't a way to sharpen post rescaling. Capture One does a pretty good job, well, an excellent job of rescaling, actually. You could argue that Photoshop is better for sort of really getting into the nitty gritty of sharpening, post rescaling, and so on. So if you wanted to do that sharpening step in Photoshop, there's nothing to stop you doing that. So all you could do in your Capture One If you look at adjustments here in the process recipe, you could say disable sharpening. That's the easiest way to do it. And then you could take that file into Photoshop or your application of choice, and then you could apply your sharpening if you wish. If you think that's better idea, then go for it. Again, there's lots of polar opinions whether you should sharpen on the raw data, on the final TIFF file, and so on and so forth. But I will leave that up to you to decide. There is no right or wrong answer to that. Could we use a token to add the process recipe name to the image name? Yes, so on output naming here, like so, we can use various different tokens. I can't remember if recipe name is included, so let's have a look. If we just start typing, yes, you could. Recipe name, like so. So if you want to physically rename the output to have the recipe name, so if I do underscore and just start typing, not the underscore, let's find it here. Under R for recipe name, drag and drop the token up there, like so. And then that means we're going to have the recipe name in the file name itself. So if you prefer that to in a folder, then that's the way to do it. So that's a good tip from Ian. Thanks, Ian. Brad says, I guess we're assuming all this work was proceeded with color calibrating our monitors. Yes, of course. I mean, all of this subject that we're talking about is kind of hinges very importantly on the fact that you are in some kind of calibrated workflow, i.e. color calibrating your monitor. Because by default, what I should have explained earlier is that when you choose a process recipe, Capture One will soft proof. I try to simulate the output of the ICC profile, what you have based on here. If you want to change that, or if you just want to flick through different options, if you look under View and then Proof Profile, you see it says Selected Recipe. Or you can scroll through any other recipe, or you can say Show All and pick all the various different profiles. But by default, Capture One will soft proof to what you have chosen in the process recipe. If you want to change that, go into Proof Profile, pick a different recipe, or pick a different profile, for example, like so. Etienne says, can you offer any advice with regards to black point and white point for printing purposes? Certain papers have varying abilities to reproduce shadow detail. Yes, they do. Again, Etienne, I think if you're printing in your own closed system, which we'll come to next with your own printer, then you can certainly sit there with a big stack of paper and come to your own conclusions. I'd say printing to an external service, it's probably very difficult to know exactly what you're going to get unless you have lots of experience about how the printer is going to perform and so on. I probably wouldn't start messing with the input levels as such. I mean, I wouldn't change anything with the input levels as such, but if you know on your particular paper that you're going to have very solid shadows, which you shouldn't do really, you could try to open up the shadows a little bit using the output levels as such. But again, with all these things, if you change too many variables before you print, you don't know what caused it. So I personally, if I was going to do a test print, which you could easily do a cheap one on something like this, is to leave pretty much everything as is, but with the correct ICC profile, and see what you get back. That's probably a good way to start. Tom says, can you calibrate a MacBook Pro 13-inch monitor? The Apple shop told me their software does the job. I'd certainly disagree with that as well. I mean, you can always do better than your factory profile, but it does require some kind of hardware, of course, to get that done, like an X-Rite i1 display, which I use, which seems to have consistently worked well, but there are other products as well. Some monitors calibrate better than others. My monitor I'm here is okay. It's not brilliant for calibration. Sometimes it takes a few hits to get it right. And some other monitors are very good. Of course, if you're serious about printing, then an investment in a good monitor is going to make sense. So, assuming that we are ready to upload, I'm not going to go through a whole upload process and buying a print from Whitewall, but what I will show you is, say, in my shopping basket, I've added one. And as I was saying, this is kind of a whole framed image and so on, printed 30 by 20, framed, glassed, and all that kind of stuff. So if you do want to take advantage of your discount, we'll send this in an email, phase 1 12, and then you can redeem, for example, and then you get some money off, 12% basically on whatever you get. There is a checkbox here, automatic image optimization. I would not check that. I think that's probably for the lower end of the clientele that use Whitewall, who are uploading all kinds of stuff. If you're confident that you've got your image correctly exposed, adjusted to your liking, then I would say don't let them touch it. I'm sure you'd all agree as well. So phase 1 12, 12% off on Whitewall for all the various different services. Okay, so that pretty much deals with preparing a print to a service provider. Just remember, create yourself a process recipe, get the correct ICC profile in there, observe the format and resolutions that your service provider suggests will give you the best results. If you want to go to certain dimensions, then change dimensions here and put in your values and the units. And then the crucial part in the crop tool is to remember to change this to, if you click and hold on the crop tool, is change this to output, like so. And that means however you set the crop, it's going to lock automatically to 30 by 20. So even if I do that, then we're still going to get a 30 by 20 output from it as such, like so, all the way down to here to up there. So I hope that makes sense. Pretty straightforward. And don't forget, when you're outputting, you can either get Capture One to automatically place the output into a subfolder based on the recipe name, or as per Ian's suggestion, you could even add the recipe name to the file name itself, and that way there isn't going to be any ambiguous danger of sending the wrong image to the wrong paper and so on. Sharpening wise, as we discussed, there is no right or wrong answer. You could probably push it more, but it's going to depend on your output size, the paper size, the printer that's used, and so on. So if you're using an external printing service, there may be some kind of trial and error required as such. But if you're prepared to sort of invest in using a printing service, then it probably makes sense to throw a test print their way just to see if you're happy with their service. We did some really big enlargements for Whitewall and we're very happy. So Charles says, could Capture One use Nik filters? You can't use the Nik filters internally, but for example, if you're happy with the print here, and then you want to edit with an external application, if you right click and say edit with, then you'll get some options here. Again, we could choose TIFF and our dimensions. For example, we could pick that here, say 30 by 20, and then we could open with, and then you could choose Nik filters here, and then it could open it up in Nik filters. You could apply the sharpening if you're happy to do that, and then you could go ahead and print, for example. Dominic says, say one more time, but slowly. My English is bad. Why in printing is 8-bit better? Well, I wouldn't say 8-bit is better, but I don't think you will get any benefit from going to 16-bit. Makes sense to have a 16-bit file if you're going to Photoshop to do further work, retouching and so on. But as the image is already been converted here to your correct ICC profile space, Whitewall or your service provider, I hope, are not going to make any further adjustments to your image. So therefore, there's no benefit to working in 16-bit for printing as such. I don't think so anyway. But by all means, if you want to test, send an 8, send a 16, and see if you can see a difference. They do say, of course, on their FAQ, if I go back a page, back a page again, that they accept 300 DPI 8-bit. So I imagine if you sent a 16-bit to Whitewall or probably any other service provider, it won't make any difference anyway. Ron says, what would you recommend as a paper from Whitewall for a first print? Wow, that's a big question. They have so many. If you look at, say, photo prints, for example, there's all kinds of different options. I mean, there's too many to actually talk about, all kinds of stuff. So The Hahnemuhle stuff is very nice. That's great paper, but to be honest, you're going to get all kinds of variations and nice results from whatever they sell. But yeah, go for a Hahnemuhle maybe, and you can go up to pretty big sizes, as you can see. And the price is pretty good. See, 30 by 20. Oh, that's in pounds. 12.95. Probably not that much difference in euros. So give it a try. Exactly. Ian says if you're editing, you would want to use 16-bit. For printing, 8-bit is fine because you're not changing any of the data. Does phase 1 offer sharpening preset suggestions? We do have some sharpening presets. We do. You can see here. So no sharpening, pre-sharpening, soft image sharpening, and so on. But there isn't a lot there, to be honest. Again, you could write a whole book on sharpening methods and what's better and what isn't. When we come to the Epson or printing to your own printer in a minute, I'll give you my own feedback. But I honestly wouldn't tell you which numbers to put here because there's so much variation on who says what, to be honest. My personal thing is that I always tend to keep the radius low, and then I just adjust the amount until I see what looks good on screen or at 50%. I really don't get sort of that heavily involved in the various different sharpening methods. Maybe that's an error on my part, but I haven't seen huge benefits from all these various sort of different tricks of the trade. But you can probably learn something from the experienced people out there. Oh, good tip from Christian. Order a white wool sample kit for €5. That's a good idea. And Paul says that as well, get a paper sample kit. So that's a great idea because as there's so many different paper types out there, and for other service providers, €5 seems a good investment just to get some paper. Jan says, will Capture One interpolate if the output size is bigger than the original size? Yes, Capture One will do interpolation up to, I can't remember if it was 200% or 400%, but yes, it will interpolate to some extent. You'll see an error if you can't go larger, basically. So there is no issue with Capture One increasing the size, so just go ahead and try that in Capture One. We do a pretty nice job of the interpolation. Lyndon says, once you've set up the print parameters in Capture One, how do you get it to Whitewall? Well, it's pretty simple. You say upload photos. There we go. And then you just browse for your photo and upload, and then you can go ahead and start to do so. This is one I uploaded earlier just to show you. And then you see you can go through the products. So you could pick your different paper. You can choose your size and format, and so on. So it's pretty simple. If you go to whitewall.com, they walk you through the process. It's not tricky at all. Then you can choose paper, frame, more options, and spend lots of money. Of course, it's easy to get expensive when you get excited about big prints and frames and so on. Okay, so let's have a look at printing directly from Capture One. And of course, you're going to have much more control doing it this way. You can verify the results and so on. So you just need a printer, which printers themselves aren't expensive. Ink, on the other hand, is the monopoly which the manufacturers have, unfortunately. But I guess it's expensive stuff. Okay, so how do we print from Capture One? Let's just start with this one same image. Now, I'm not going to use this process recipe because it's not correct. So I'm going to make a new process recipe, and we call this Epson. What have I borrowed? I have to say thanks to Teamwork in London for lending me a print. Thank you, Steve at Teamwork, lending me the printer. It's an Epson Stylus Photo R2880. Not chosen for any particular reason, chosen because, as far as I can tell, it does pretty nice prints, and it's what Steve had available. So thanks again to Steve. And it serves our purposes here just for demoing how to get a print. Of course, I can't show you the print, but of course I can show you the various dialog boxes that come with a printer like this. So Epson 2880, I've got a semi-gloss premium photo paper, and it's currently A4 size. So it makes sense to have a process recipe like that. And let's go for, again, if I wanted to send this to Photoshop to do external work, resizing, sharpening, or whatever, then it makes sense to have a process recipe. But to be honest, if you're printing, always going to print directly from Capture One, you don't really have to do this step. But if you wanted to, we could then choose our ICC profile here, and I've got premium semi-gloss photo. So, and pick the correct ICC profile. So you could do that, again, similar principle with Whitewall. If you were going to export this to Photoshop, do a bit of retouching, maybe do your sharpening and then print. But if you're going to print directly from Capture One, you don't actually need the process recipe, because all your decisions about ICC profiles are done within the print engine itself. So let's say we want to print this image. What do we need to do? Well, the only thing we really need to do first off is to click on the print button like so. And there you see we've got our simulation soft-proofed image here like so. And then we simply need to run through the various different things here. So paper A4, resolution automatic, sharpening we get to in a minute, but let's talk about the color management side of it first. So this is why I said we don't need to necessarily set up a process recipe, because we sort out all our color management here. You can say, if you wish, manage by printer, but in the print dialog, which we'll come to in a minute, you have to carefully set up all the color management here. But to be honest, it probably makes more sense to do it from Capture One. So let's find the correct ICC profile, premium semi-gloss photo, like so. And you'll see if I just flick through some various different profiles, I don't know if you can see on the webinar transmission, but it does give you, and that's quite a dramatic one as that CMYK profile, but it does give you a soft proof on screen, again, of how the image is going to turn out like so. Rendering intent, you can choose rendering intent here. I did a little bit of research yesterday, and based on what Epson USA is saying, they say go for relative colorimetric and have black point compensation on. Again, you can see the difference between perceptual and relative, again, because we're soft proofing. If you want to know the difference between the two, again, a quick Google search will help you, but I did find quite a good explanation here of what the different rendering intents are doing compared relative colorimetric to perceptual. So you can see from the graphic that on perceptual, any colors that are out of gamut and the colors that are in gamut are converted to the final image, but sort of averaged across the whole color space. Relative colorimetric, in gamut colors are not changed, and then the out of gamut colors are forced to the either edge of the converted image. So again, on this image, there's really not much to say is different. So again, test, print, and then you'll know exactly what's going to happen. Ollie says, is there a soft proof button? It's always soft proofing. So as I hope you've seen, regardless of what you put in here, we're always getting a soft proof button. Nicholas says, where did I get the ICC profiles from Whitewall? It's just a download on their site. So look at the bottom of their web page and you'll see an ICC profile. If you have multiple output recipes chosen, which one is the proof profile? That's the selected recipe. So the one that's highlighted, that's the one that's proofing. Or you can do what I did earlier. You can go to the view menu and you can manually pick a proof profile. So that's probably the way to do it. Okay, so this is always soft proofing. A few of you are asking that. So whatever you get here, it's always soft proofing. Again, this is very much based on the quality of your monitor calibration. So if your monitor isn't calibrated, then all of this is very pointless because you could be getting very varied results. You get a good warning here. Before printing, turn off color management in the print dialog. We'll come to that in a minute. Now, you're going to see another slider here called sharpening. So this is output sharpening. You can choose to set this to 0 if you want to do all your sharpening based in Capture One, or you can use this slider as additional output sharpening. So let's say the image in Capture One, you're happy with its sharpness level on screen, but you want to apply a bit more sharpening for print, then you can use the slider here. Again, there's no right or wrong value for this. It's test and print based on paper, print size, and so on. I found printing to A4 semi-gloss on Epson paper that around 50 gave me a nice result. You might prefer more, you might prefer less. Again, there's no right number, unfortunately. Test and print and you'll be happy. So as I said, I found 50 is about right. By default, it comes up to 25, which is very little difference from the sharpening that you saw in Capture One to the additional output sharpening that you're seeing here. And then 50, I could definitely see a notable difference, and it looked really good. There was no nasty sort of sharpening halos or anything like that. It was just a crisper, better print. So maybe try 25, 50, 75, do a few prints or one of each, and then see what lands on best. Emmanuel says, since you're soft proofing, I would suggest a first set relative or perceptual according to the image before doing anything else. There we go. So again, it's all soft proofing. So have a look at perceptual. You can see a slight change in shadow density here. Have a look at relative. Really. Not much to say is different, but the fact that you're soft proofing is really useful. Sorry, I was just looking at questions. How do you do adjustments to soft proof if you're not happy with the profile's resulting image? Well, if we say we printed this and we weren't happy, like it was too contrasty and so on, but it should be pretty similar from the prints I've done to the Epson that I've borrowed to what I was seeing on screen. It's very, very close, very, very close. So in theory, if you have a well-profiled monitor and a good color profile for your printer, again, you could profile the printer, then it should be really, really close on screen. Of course, if you need to do rough tweaks, there's nothing to stop you making adjustments in Capture One, proofing with the printer profile. Do I have to enter a screen profile? No, Derek, we don't. It's all automatic in the background. Capture One is aware of your monitor profile and uses that in all the color management pipeline. So there's nothing you have to do. Okay, let's move on. We can go to page setup. This is just the page setup panel for the in the system. So the only thing I need set here is really the printer and the paper size, and that's it. When we actually come to print, we get to the print settings box and we can change further. Now we're only printing one print right now. We do a layout of 4 prints a minute, so you can see further options. Down here, we've got units and guides. So if you wanted to see the guides, that's just showing me the printable area on my paper. You can print those guides if you wish as well. Various different margins. These are the margins based on the printer, 0.32. You can, of course, change those margins if you wish just by pulling the slider. And as you saw, it's dynamic. So as you adjust the slider, you get an instant output of how the image is going to look on paper. Now we've only got one image here. So when we come to lay up 4 images, we return to this section, the layout, and the image settings as well. There are some templates here. So for example, if we just pick full page, then that sets everything here to print an image to full page without having to worry about anything else. You can add annotation, so either the description from the IPTC data or the file name of the image. Quite good if you want to print contact sheets, for example. And under watermark, you can add a text watermark or an image watermark. So if you're printing proofs for evaluation, but you don't want them to be stolen or used, you can simply overlay a text, or you can overlay an image, there we go, onto the image itself. So you just drag and drop an image there, and that will be printed across the top. We can change the opacity, of course, and the scaling and the position and so on. So you can do that if you wish as well. So printing one image is pretty straightforward. The bit you just need to get right is the color profile, choose the correct rendering intent, decide if you want more sharpening, and then you're good to go. So once we say print, for the Epson, we've got our print settings here. And then again, we have to make sure we choose the correct thing. So I need to choose premium semi-gloss, like so. Do I know anything about Canon? Someone was asking. Not a great deal, but I imagine the variations aren't going to be that much different. There is an option on the Epson here to do super photo at 5760 DPI. I printed one of each, a 1440 and a 560, and to be honest, at A4 I couldn't really see the difference. If there was a difference, I'd have my nose pressed up to the print, and I certainly would have noticed it if it was hanging on the wall. Again, there's lots of discussion on the internet whether you need to do this or not. I shall leave that up to you, of course. As I said, I couldn't see a difference at A4. High speed in Epson's case just means that the print head will print bidirectionally, so it will lay down ink in this direction and that direction and so on. If you turn that off, it means the print head will only print in one direction. If your print head alignment is good, and I didn't seem to have any issue on this printer, then it was fine leaving it on high speed. So that's all we need to do to set up here. We don't have to do anything in advanced color settings. It's a good idea. It shows you that just a review of the paper type and appropriate color profile to be used. The color profile I actually found here was produced by Epson USA, which is supposed to be better than the shipped profile. Whether it is or not, again, you can test and evaluate. So let's do a print. Let's say print. What you'll see is the print dialog will disappear. You'll see an activity here rendering 1 out of 1 images, less than a minute left. So Capture One will output or process the image to the correct size that is necessary for that print. And then my printer is printing and whirring away happily. While it's doing that, let's just check questions. Can we print a contact sheet? Yes, we'll have a look at that. We do that next. Janie says, I have a Canon printer, and even though the monitor has been calibrated, it prints out quite dark. I do have a plugin for Photoshop and Lightroom that works quite well. However, if I print directly from Photoshop, I have a dark print issue. Could we use the Canon plugin directly through Capture One? It depends a little bit how the Canon driver works, but to be honest, if the Canon driver is working well, you should be able to access all of that directly from print settings. So I don't have the Canon 2 attached, so we can't check. But to be honest, if your color management is correct, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to print directly from Capture One, from Lightroom, from Photoshop, or whatever. How important is proofing the printer? Some of the color calibrators that both do display and printer are quite expensive. Is it worth the extra cost? If you're going to do a lot of printing, it probably is, or maybe it depends how demanding you are for your print to match the screen, of course. Everyone has different levels of acceptability. So if you really want to get super accurate results from screen to print, then it's probably worth investing in it. Or maybe you can just pay someone to profile your printer for you. That's another option as well. There's certainly a few services that can profile by post, so they tell you what to print. You print it on your stock paper, you send it back, and they send you an ICC profile. So if you're not having to profile a lot of papers, maybe that's a good way to do it as well. If I just pull this printout now, which you can't see, and I compare it to my screen in daylight, it's actually not bad. It's a little bit dark, but other than that, color-wise, it's spot on. So I'm sort of pretty happy with that, and that's from a canned profile. I'm sure if I had this printer and I wanted to do lots of prints, I'd actually pay for someone to profile it. I think that would be money well spent. What about printing black and white? Well, that's a very good question, and to be honest, Jan, that's probably an area which is outside of my expertise, because again, you could buy different inks, black and white set of inks with gray values, which will probably give you a better result than the standard color set. And then there's all kinds of other things that you can do. I did stumble across a good website, which was recommended to me by a fellow webinar viewer, blackandwhitemastery.com. All kinds of information here about black and white printing. So probably the first thing I would do if you want to really get serious about black and white printing is maybe have a look here, and of course other resources as well. But if you wanted to print black and white from Capture One, you could actually just go black and white, enable black and white, like so, adjust as you felt necessary, using the various different sliders, and then just following the same procedure. Treat it as a color print with the same ICC profile, and see how you get on with that as well. But serious color printing, you want to invest in different inks and so on and so forth, and probably another printer. If you want to print color and black and white, swapping over inks is really not something you want to do, because you're just sending ink down the drain every time you want to switch cartridges. So a dedicated black and white printer would make sense. Anthony says, if you're using a RIP, and a few other people have asked about RIP, would you see much difference with printing directly from Capture One? Well, I guess I would say that it's difficult to say, really. I'm sure the RIP gives you more options in terms of layouts and things like that, but in terms of image quality, color accuracy, and so on, as long as you follow the right color management procedures, I can't envisage there being a dramatic difference. Adrian says, my sample is in TIFF format. Can I use RAW? No, this is a RAW file. See, right here. This is a RAW file, and if we say print, that goes straight from the RAW file to output. There's no intermediate process or whatever. I'm not saving a TIFF and so on. Capture One will process that raw data in a format that can be sent to the printer, but it's not like I need to have a TIFF file in Capture One as such. Robert says he has a Canon printer profile with Color Monkey. Colors are good, ink costs are ridiculous. Yes, unfortunately, that's always the way with ink. It's the liquid gold of the modern world. That's for sure. When I'm printing from Capture One, I often have the wrong colors. When I use Image by Printer and use the same profile, it's more or less okay. There seems to be double color management going on. Yes, in the Epson dialog, it actually works pretty okay. If you have it set here, you see before printing, turn off color management in the print dialog. In the Epson dialog, if we go to print settings, like so, you see color management is off. Color settings off, no color adjustment, so it's automatically done here. You might want to check if in the Canon driver, if you're doubling up on your color management, which you could be. I remember when sort of the inkjet printers became more popular, you had to do a lot of really careful checks in the print dialog, otherwise you were always doubling up on color management. It was a right pain, but it seems to be much slicker now as such. John rather says, I'm going to make the process recipes available. How? You'll get links in a follow-up email in a couple of days time. Can we print a picture package? Yes. So for example, let's just grab 4 images like so, and then say print. And now we're going to see sort of various different things that we can do. So if you look at the template, full page basically means we print 1 image per page. So down here, page 1 of 4, if we say next, 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 that would just give me an idea of what each image is going to look like. But let's say we want 4 on a page. If we just go to template, say 2 by 2 cells, for example, that's going to give me this. Like so. Again, the layout wise, this is where we can change everything. So you see it's set by 2 by 2. Row spacing is currently 0, but if I wanted to, I could just drag this slider, and you see we can eke out the rows a bit. Column spacing, whoops, we can use our cursor keys if we want to be more specific. We can adjust the columns like so, especially if you need to guillotine stuff, it sometimes helps. And the cell height and cell width and the cell border. So all of these sliders you can adjust. I've got show guides turned on, which is how this way you can see what each cell is printing to. If we want to fill those cells, for example, we could say zoom to fill, and then the cells are filled up. But of course, you don't have any control on how the image is cropped. That's why I say it's best with the process recipe or with the crop tool to actually crop to your exact size that you're going to print to. If we say repeat 1 image per page, then we're going to get the same image on each page, like so, for example. That can be useful as well. So you've got all these various different options. So you can either use a template. So for example, we've got contact sheets down here. So if you wanted 3x6, for example, then that just gives us basic contact sheet like so. By default, it adds the file name, or you could have a description. Again, contact sheet square, landscape square, fit 2x3. Again, so various different ways of picking these templates. You can save a template too. So if you've devised your own template, then of course don't forget to save it, and that way you don't have to set it up each time. Leonard says, ink costs, see if you can get external tanks. Yes, that's another way of saving money. Graham says Canon is very similar to Epson, just make sure the profile is selected in the Capture One screen before looking at the print settings. There we go. So as I said, if the color management is tight, you shouldn't have any issues with images looking incorrect, etc. Just make sure you're not doubling up on that color management. Can you explain how to set up margin spacing to match exactly the size of the paper? Well, generally it's automatic because we've got paper A4 here in the page setup. You should find that under A4. So this is set for. Make sure you have in the page setup, make sure you actually choose the printer model here, because then what you'll see is we have all the various different paper sizes for this printer, and if we look under A4, you've got the various different sections here. See A4 sheet feeder, borderless, etc., and so on. And then based on that, that sets up, see the correct margins here. See 0.85, 0.84, 0.32, and so on. So if I just go full page again, then we've got the exact paper size that it can print to. Oh, let's make sure I've got that. Yeah, A4 sheet feeder like so. So full page, and then we're going to be set exactly to what we need to do, because there's no margin, 0, 0, 0, 0. If we said in here, page setup, A4, just standard A4, A4 borderless, retained size, sheet feeder like so, then you see we've got slight different borders. So just make sure that you set up your page setup in here. So A4, we just do standard A4, like so, then we get different borders again. So just make sure that you set that properly, and then you're good to go. So that's the important step. Really make sure that you have your printer model set here, because that way everything flows nicely from then on. Can you change the print name to, say, from the file name to white car? Well, it is if you choose description, then whatever is filled in the description field in the IPTC data will be shown there as opposed to the file name. So it is possible to have anything for that. Dominic says, with your experience in printing high resolution Epson or Canon, you know what, again, it's one of those subjects which you'll get polar opinions on. I've always had great prints from Epson. Equally, I've always had great prints from various HP printers, and I've always had great prints from Canon. I think the inkjet technology is so good these days that it's probably hard to split one from the other. There's probably other factors you could think about, like printing speed, cost of ink, of course, how reliable it is, how often the nozzles get blocked, all that kind of stuff. But I think if you laid out 20 prints from various different printers, it's probably pretty hard these days to split it. So if there's any of you out there who can say Canon or Epson is better, then go for it. Is it possible to export instead of printing directly from Capture One? Is it possible to export? Yes, of course. So if we wanted to, let's just say cancel. Let's say we wanted to, just to finish off as we're nearly out of time, if we wanted to print this to A4, what I would do is make my process recipe like so. I'd change the scale to A4, which is 210 by 294. That's full frame A4. And I would make sure that I would say output. And now if I crop, This is A4 proportion, so I know that's going to give me my full frame A4, like so. So that's given me an A4 cropped image. I can soft proof that with the correct ICC profile in the process recipe, or as some of you are asking earlier, if we look at proof profile, then we can choose any of the profiles. If we say show all, soft proof, so I could choose any proof profile that I want. Whoops, excuse me. Let's try that again. I could choose any proof profile that I wanted to. So if I wanted to have a look at the various different papers, I could. Or to be honest, the easiest way is just to have different process recipes set up with different paper, because then as you flick through, then it'll soft proof immediately. So I've got this set to the correct dimensions, the correct profile. We could then process that out. Let's put it in a folder with its recipe name and say process. It will pop in the output folder. There we go. So now that's sized to the correct dimensions for A4. If we just open this up in Photoshop, for example. If we look at image size, so you can see we're at 29.4 by 21, and then if we wanted to retouch, do sharpening and so on, and then we could print from Photoshop directly if we wanted to. And then you'd have to go through all the various different ICC profile stuff before, but at least this way you know it's sized to the correct output. What I would do if you want to sharpen in Photoshop, don't forget in your process recipe you could say disable sharpening, and then you could go one step further and sharpen in Photoshop if you wish to, so you could optimize the sharpening for that particular output size. But that's another way of doing it, ensuring you're at the right dimensions and the right color profile and so on. Can you export a contact sheet? Oh, sorry, Michael, that wasn't what you asked, Michael, but there we go. That's some information anyway. Export from the print dialog, which placed multiple photos on one sheet. Yes, you must have missed that part, but all you need to do is select your multiple photos and say print, and then choose a template, say 2x2 cells, for example, and then you can lay out multiple ones. If you don't want to print, actually, if you want a PDF, there's nothing to stop you saying print and then saying save as PDF. So you can actually generate a PDF that way as well. If you want to generate a contact sheet, for example, you can see here contact sheet 2x3, like so. So there's various different ways of doing that. Okay, we've actually overrun slightly, so we did fill up more than an hour, which is always nice. Just to give you a couple of other resources actually, which I didn't mention straight away. As I said, I'm not a color management / printing expert. There is a new book coming out called Color Management Pro. I work with the author a little bit because it actually includes information on not just Capture One, but also our evil sibling Lightroom and other applications as well. All about the whole color management chain from calibrating monitors to printing and so on. That's just an ebook which will be ready for download soon. Ashley, the author, said it should be ready in a couple of weeks. It's just in the final sort of proofreading process. But you can put your name and email address here, and then you'll be notified when it's ready for sale. Price, depending on where you are in the EU, is sort of 20-ish euros plus VAT or minus VAT. I had a chance to preview the Capture One section, and it was really good and very helpful. And I think if you want to tighten up your whole color management chain, that's probably a good place to start. So Color Management Pro, Whitewall, remember whitewall.com. The discount code I'll put up in the email as well. So you can have a go with that. So yeah, ordering a print summary print paper pack is probably a good idea. Okay, before we have to go, just to notify you, well, I'll put that up on screen just in case you want to write that down now, is the Whitewall code. So that's phase 112. Very important. It must be in uppercase. I tried it in lowercase and it doesn't work. So phase 112 gives you 12% off white wool. Next webinar won't be next week. It's the week after. 11th of August. We had a blog post last week from a really nice guy. That's Bob on the left, who is a photographer, come musician, come APA, various other things. And he was a Lightroom user, and he actually moved over to Capture One, and he did a nice blog post explaining how. So we thought it would make sense if we got him live, just to show you the various things he did in Capture One to try to ease his transition from Lightroom as much as possible, just to make the job easier and enjoy the superior image quality, of course, that Capture One has to offer. So we're going to be with Bob on the 11th of August. I'll send the sign up link in the follow-up email, which you'll get in 1 or 2 days' time. The email will also have the YouTube playlist of where all the previous webinars are. Including this one as well, of course. I'll put in a download link for the various different white wool process recipes, just so you have an idea how that works. If you don't rename the ICC profiles from white wool, they should work just fine, but you will need to download the ICC profiles from white wool as well. That link is also in the follow-up email too. So sorry if I didn't get to your individual question. There was quite a few of you. But hopefully we managed to answer the common ones amongst you. So thanks for listening. Take care and see you next time. Cheers.